on this episode of Spirit Talk.
And it's okay to acknowledge that we're human and we're not seeing everything, and that the experience, this is the confusing part, the experience of coming through the other side and seeing everything is not everything. It's like, it's the feeling of it. And I'm sure we're connected to all things, but it wasn't all in our awareness at the same time. And so that there's more that can be learned. And I think that was even something that I felt God was showing me, is that his experience of ongoing expansion and joy is that there's more. You don't get to the end of it. And that's actually a beautiful thing, is to be in a state of humility where you can say there is more.
Hi, I'm Chris Fleming, the creator of Spirit Talk. You're listening to the podcast where I'll be bringing you the greatest thinkers, researchers, and contributors from around the world to discuss what we know in the field of the paranormal, life after death, and the pursuit of higher consciousness. Hey, it's Chris Fleming. Welcome back to this month's edition of Spirit Talk. It is February 2021. Can you believe it? It is amazing. I just think it's like yesterday it was 2020. We are moving so quickly in time. And time is like, when you get older, you realize that time is one of the most important things that we have. It is priceless. Well, my next guest, this is going to be an interesting one, everybody. His name is Dr. Brent C. Satterfield. He's invented the DNA testing technologies that have impacted millions of people in more than 50 countries, including in the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, following multiple experiences with heaven, he became a student of consciousness, faith, and experiences of God in cultures around the world. Now, Brent is a two-time author of spiritual nonfiction. His first book, Faith to Produce Miracles, was released in March of 2018. His new release, Bringing Heaven Home, has been featured on podcasts internationally. Brent, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you for coming. You know, I received this email about your book, and I was like, wow, just perfect timing, because I wanted to go into on a podcast either this month or next month talking about the afterlife, heaven, and consciousness. And that's something that you've experienced. But before we get to that, my listeners like to get to know a little bit about the person I'm interviewing. And right off the bat, I look at your resume here. Can you share with us, you invented DNA testing technologies? Can you share that?
Sure. So I've spent the last 20 some odd years working with DNA testing technologies. I have a PhD in bioengineering that I got from Arizona State University while on fellowship from the Department of Homeland Security. And what that meant is I got to go to different labs around the world, or not around the world, I'm sorry, around the US, right. And to work with their bioterror countermeasures. So trying to detect anthrax or other types of outbreaks. And I took those ideas, or I took the ideas that I applied in those settings and continued to develop them and tried to create technologies that would reduce the cost of testing in the developing world. So from about 2008 to the present, I've spent a lot of time overseas in Latin America, India, different countries where they may not have as much access to medical care as we have here, and just trying to find ways to get the cost down, trying to find ways to get the technology to the people who need it most. And here in the last year, the company I've been working with, they took the technology and applied it towards the coronavirus. We weren't initially expecting it to hit the U.S. We were thinking it was going to be something taking place in China and India. And so we were developing a test for it, expecting it to be just an overseas type of thing. But when it came back to the U.S., we were in a position to respond to it. And it was a really exciting time to be able to contribute to something that has impacted us here at home so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's, right there, we can do a whole podcast talking about that. I don't want to deviate too much away from that, but have you had COVID? I had it back in September. It was brutal.
If I had it, I don't know about it. I'm one of
Okay.
those people without symptoms. So
Good for you. Good for you. Now, for some of my listeners, some of us have had DNA tests where we've gone in to see, who we're related to, where our ancestry comes back, and I don't know how accurate those tests are. But can you share a little bit about DNA, the importance in what it is today in science and the things that you do?
sure, it is the building block of all life science research today. Everything that the scientists, whether they're studying evolution and kind of looking back at how organisms have evolved over the the history of the earth, or whether we're looking at crime scene investigation, or whether we're studying new technologies for producing oil from bacteria or related organisms. All of these things require us to have an understanding of the genetic fingerprint of the organism we're studying. And the work that I've done it's inclusive of all these different applications. It's just that the company has chosen to focus on infectious disease. And it's the same kind of thing. You're grabbing a snippet of genetic information from the organism you're studying and using that to identify what's there. So whether you're identifying an ancestor, whether you're identifying somebody at a crime scene, or whether you're identifying a virus, it's effectively the same technology.
I find it just fascinating. And I remember hearing a few years ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago, I was watching some scientific special, and one of the guys was saying something but there was 1,000 or 1,000,000 strands of the DNA, the helix, that we still didn't understand. So they kind of just put that to the side and they focused on what they did understand. Is that true, or have we figured that out yet? Or
it's the science is still progressing. I mean, you consider it was in the late 90s when we first really cultivated the ability to start studying DNA in depth, and when they started assembling the human genome. So we've only just accomplished that assembly. And in the beginning, there was an assumption that most of the DNA would be very useful, that the only DNA that would be in a human or any other living organism would be going forward to create that organism. And what was discovered is that there are huge chunks in the DNA that used to be called junk DNA because it just appeared to not have any connection to the organism. And as time goes on, scientists are gradually discovering more and more uses for that junk DNA, discovering that's not junk at all, but it just isn't obvious. It doesn't go into the coding for a gene that just is really easy to see what it does.
so basically, the universe creator is not just throwing filler in there.
No.
Like some corporations do with some of the foods we eat,
Right.
So, but see, to me, it's fascinating because we're going to go in and talk about your book, Bringing Heaven Home. And when you look at science and you look at the some people say the possibility of a creator, but then there's those of us that have had experience that know there's a creator, is that science, which you had separating from science and religion a long time ago, it's like science is kind of coming back and proving that there is an intelligence behind the intricacy, the software, the DNA, how things are all fitting together in the quantum and the microscopic levels. I mean, how has science affected you in validating your belief?
It's an interesting question. For many, many years, the question I would get from people, I was very religious most of my life.
Okay.
And the question I would get is, how can you be religious and be a scientist? Like they would see it as being a conflict.
Really?
But to me, it never was a conflict. It was always, science always revealed more questions than it answered. And the more questions it answered, it just created more questions. And so to me, it was never really a conflict of my belief system or my faith. But in conservative Christianity, especially where you're looking at things like the age of the earth and evolution, these become hot topics for many people that have a literal interpretation of biblical writings. And so from an early time, I had to I had to adjust that belief system so that it wasn't quite as literally based on what the cultural interpretation was.
Mm-hmm.
But to your question as to how has science continued to affect my belief, well, as that are much more expansive than cultural religious understandings. The science, as you mentioned, like in the quantum field, that becomes interesting. It just absolutely fascinating because it does seem to dovetail with what people like myself are experiencing on the other side.
Okay, let's go into that. I mean, I know my listeners, I've talked briefly in the past of law of observation and how emotions affect our reality. But when you get into even quantum physics, there was an article that just came out recently talking about how our emotions are now they realize the emotions are impacting the law of observation, where it's not just the person comes in, looks at the particles, and then the particles appear or they react to that individual, but the actual differences of emotions with the participant is affecting the subatomic level, which, you go into the mustard seed, parable and stuff is, faith of a mustard seed. If you realized how everything works, you can move the mountain or you can move the tree into the ocean, which goes on the other side and creating your own heaven and its consciousness. So let's go into that. How did you stated earlier, you've been religious your whole life. Were you Catholic? Were you Christian? What type of religion did you practice?
So I've intentionally stayed vague about my denomination.
Okay, no problem. That's no problem. No, it's okay. And I respect that. I respect that. It's just, I know that there's listeners that are very spiritual, yes. Listeners that are religious, some that are Christian, some that are atheist, some that are this. I mean, when people ask me, what's your religion? I was raised Roman Catholic. I went to a Roman Catholic grade school, 8 years. My dad wanted me to go to a Catholic high school, so I went 1 year. It was all boys school. I hated it, so I went to a public school. And I was glad I went to a public school. But my belief is I'm grateful, so grateful for the belief in angels, Jesus, Scripture, that I learned because it's helped me through my life. But I've also opened up my awareness to understand that there are other perspectives of heaven and beliefs and ways to get to heaven that I was like, wow, I think there's all these different parts that come together. So can you share with us, I don't even know where to begin, but what made you write a book, Bringing Heaven Home? How did you get to that?
It took a lot of thought. I honestly started writing the book just to process my own feelings. There was nobody to talk to these experiences about, because I felt like in my religious culture, if you weren't talking what was being taught on Sunday in identical kind of way, then it wasn't necessarily welcome. And so it was very hard for me to start looking deeply at what I had experienced in context of what I had been taught and trying to resolve those differences. And so me writing almost began just as a function of journaling, of just trying to understand, like, what did I feel? Why did I feel it? What was the experience? What did I see? What did I hear? What did it mean for my life? How did it affect my religious beliefs? If I chose to be open about that, how would that affect the people that I cared about, family, friends? And right. So there was just so much material to work through, and I didn't just have one experience. There were a series of these experiences. Really? Yes. And so each one, it was like, it continued to open my understanding. So I think, anybody that I've ever spoken with who's had an experience on the other side, they come back different. Even my first experience, a lot of the symbols that I was shown, a lot of the things I saw reflected my religious beliefs, but there was an experience of love there that was unlike anything that I had ever been taught about. I mean,
the unconditional
love. And I mean, it's taught, people use those words, say God is unconditional love, but then in their behavior, there is a lot of shame about their actions or about the actions that other people are taking. And it is a completely different experience to have the experience of unconditional love versus to hear somebody talk about it. Because I just believe that there isn't a reference in our world to understand what that means. Because we're getting the definition of love from our parents and from TV and from society, and none of those have any comparison to the experience of unconditional love. So even just that feeling began to unwind my whole belief system, because I'm thinking that the first thought that really hit me when I was on the other side is, oh my goodness, there is no judgment. It was just this absolute intense understanding, because I was feeling so much love, so much acceptance, that it was just plain that if there was any possibility of judgment, any possibility of disappointing the divine, that there would be fear, that there would be some emotion that just did not exist in that space.
Right. Let's back up just shortly here. As you're getting into, flashback to that experience that you're sharing with us, what was the first experience you had, and what happened?
So the first experience I had was probably a little unusual for people in, well, I don't know, maybe they're all unusual.
Yeah, of course. Nothing's unusual to my listeners.
Right. Because the first one, it didn't involve any part of me dying. I actually was interacting with a woman who'd had 4 near-death experiences. And the first one she had in a plane crash. And she had reached out to me spontaneously one day. She just said that she had been inspired to call me and that she was supposed to work with me. And at the time, I was very interested in the spiritual side. We talk about the difference between religious versus spiritual, right? And I was very interested in understanding spiritual things, having communion with the other side. And she reached out to me and said, look, I feel like I'm supposed to work with you. And I'm thinking, well, what does that mean? And so, but I was curious because she's talking about her near-death experience. And as I developed a relationship with her over the next several weeks, I discovered that one of the gifts that she brought back from the other side was the ability to help somebody transition, to have a near-death experience without dying. And on one of the visits where I had gone to see her, I had this vision in my head where I saw like I was holding a piece of her heart. And it was just in my mind's eye. I just saw myself placing my hand over her chest, and I started to do it. Like I for some reason, I just started moving with what I was seeing. And then I became really self-conscious and thought, oh my goodness, I can't put my hand on her chest. But she saw what I was doing. She grabbed my hand, put it squarely over her heart, and said, wow, that's exactly where Jesus puts his hand. And the minute she did that, I felt this fire erupt inside me, just like my whole body became, it was like pins and needles, but a lot more intense, where everything starts to go numb. It just felt like I was washing out, dissolving out. And I was really confused because I was feeling her thoughts. It's like I could see her thoughts, but I couldn't.
Collective consciousness. Yeah.
I couldn't tell. I was like, is this my thought or her thought? And so I'm trying to ask her what's going on, because I really just had no idea. And she said, this is the feeling you get right before you cross over. And then she told me to lay down. And then she encouraged me to go deeper into it and kind of help me to cross all the way over. So that's how my first experience began.
Okay. So it was like an out-of-body experience, an induced out-of-body experience.
Yes.
Incredible.
And so in that particular experience, I had a series of life reviews. I met with a few angelic beings who had religious significance for me. And it was really fascinating because I always would have imagined that a life review would have been more, more like what I had imagined in church.
Right. Yeah.
It was almost the opposite. It was more like they were there to help me realize how perfect everything had been. That it was helping me to see how my life had measured up to the symbols that I had been living in my religious belief system, and also to inquire as to what was really in my heart. And I remember that the feeling there was just this overwhelming desire to feel the love of divine presence. And I had there were a couple of different things that took place in this space, and one of them was a memory coming back. It was like bringing back this flood of memories before this life, where
and how you judged yourself and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
Regrets
and
I can see your emotions and your body movements, your emotions starting to come out a little bit, and continue. I mean, it's wonderful that you're sharing this with us.
So, but there was a memory even before, like, I started creating experience in this life, and it was a memory of being with God, and I saw Jesus there, and it's like the three of us were talking, and we were laughing, and the thing that just hit me was, God laughs, and because it was this feeling of absolute joy, and it was so in contradiction with the way that I had seen God as being kind of serious, and or even just what the Bible talks about Jesus, him weeping and him doing all these miracles and other things. And I just always imagined that he was really serious, but the experience, the recollection of those memories before this life was such that, wait, that is all wrong. Like there is so much love, there is so much joy there, that laughter itself is healing. I'd almost developed a belief within my religious understanding that laughter was not a good thing, that maybe we need to be more serious, more like I say, I came from a fairly conservative viewpoint. But and it's not to say that no laughter was good, but maybe like not.
I understand that. Right. I went to a Catholic school in grade school. You kidding me? They used to pull me out in the hallway for some stuff that I said. Yeah, I understand.
So all of these things were precursors. And so as they were asking me these questions, what is it that you most want? I was remembering this feeling with them and the love that I felt. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I want to have that love in my whole being, but I want to have that on earth. I don't know how we do that, but I want to be able to take that love in that heavenly state and feel it in this body. And I remember just it's like they had this joy. It was like their smile, their feeling just enveloped me. And then I found myself coming through a veil, as it were, into a space with a brilliant light, absolutely beautiful temple. And I became enamored with like every little detail, like the drops of water,
oh my God,
the flecks in the wood. And I just, like, you're looking into it, and I'm just thinking I could spend forever just looking at the detail in all of these structures. And they felt living, they felt alive, they felt intelligent, they felt loving. And there was just beauty, joy. And so I was conducted into the temple, and then there were more questions. What is it that you most want? And it was just that same feeling of, I want to feel this love. I want to feel this heavenly state on earth. And so I kept being conducted deeper into the temple. In this particular experience, I came through into another space where I wrote in my journal that I was in the presence of God. Now, my memory here on earth is a little bit fuzzy of this part of the journey, because I have, certain religious definitions of what it means to be in the presence of God, but my experience there wasn't the way that I'd imagined religiously. I guess I'd always imagined God having a body like you and I do, and in just a very physical kind of way. But there was this almost confusing, I shouldn't say confusing feeling, because in that space it wasn't confusing. It's just confusing sometimes now, looking back on it and trying to figure out and sort through exactly what was that. Because there was a feeling of like, yes, I was talking to somebody like they did have a body, but yet I was enveloped in this light, as if the light itself were the divine being. And so my religious definitions weren't sufficient for what it was that I was experiencing.
I understand that. There's a couple things. Is one, you had mentioned the details, and my listeners may remember this when I talked about the induced out of body I had, years ago during Dead Famous, and I walked with Janis Joplin, and there was this beautiful mountainside with flowers and everything, and I was enamored that the glistening of the water and the light bouncing off the flowers, the grass and the beads of water on the grass, everything was alive. And when I looked at it, I became a part of it, and I was looking up at myself because I was worried. I said, "Oh my God, it's alive! I don't want to step on it." She says, "Look again," and then I looked again, and I realized that it was becoming a part of me as I walked through it. It was melding with me, where it wasn't getting crushed or anything like that. And then I was like, "Well, what is this perfect harmonic tone that the grass and the flowers are all emanating?" And I heard this tone. And when I tapped into that tone, which was this pure white light of energy that was going to the Creator and back, it was unconditional love. Mm-hmm. And I saw that this existence of heaven was sending love to the Creator. It was coming right back and just being consistently recycled, saying, "Thank you for creating me and me being a part of you, an extension of you," and it's giving it right back and it's keeping it going, this constant connection. So when you start talking about the details, I'm thinking of that going, wow, that reminds me.
Exactly that feeling. And as you talk, as I talk, and I know as people talk in general, we have the capacity to tune into a little bit of the emotion, to feel some of what they're feeling, some of what they're describing. There's information behind the words, and I'm sure you experienced this or something like it. But for me, when I was on the other side, the words that were spoken were the smallest part of the information that was being conveyed. And it's almost like the words were just focal points about which consciousness could then expand and then have deeper, almost lifetimes of experiences in some cases.
Yes.
And so I notice now that being back in this space, the way that I like to listen to things, like when you're talking, it's I like to connect to the feeling, to the energy behind the words. And as you're describing, those details, I have to say that's exactly or so close to the same as what I felt, what I experienced. So I love that description, that extra clarification.
No, thank you. I use to chime a lot to cleanse myself and reconnect myself with the other side. And you brought up about Jesus, and I love to hear people's stories about Jesus. I mean, I grew up with the faith about Jesus, and I used to pray to him, and I used to pray to God. And I even asked the priest certain questions that got him really upset. I said, well, if Jesus is praying to himself, then how could you say that Jesus is God and this and that? And, they'd grab me, bring me out in the hallway. But I remember in 6th grade, and I've spoken about this in my podcast before, so I'm going to say it real quickly. I'm not going to go into details. But I was going through a really hard time, parents separating, being teased at school, this and that, and I came home and I didn't want to be here anymore. Now, I wasn't contemplating or thinking suicide. I just said, I don't want to be here anymore. And I remember laying down on my bed, and then all of a sudden, boom, I'm somewhere else. I'm in the hallway. I'm looking at my hands going, what am I doing here? I'm not supposed to be here. So I knew I was there consciously. Walk into my classroom. Nobody's there because they're not, nobody's there after school, but there's Jesus. Mm. And Jesus was standing there, and he turns around, and he's got this Groucho Marx novelty gag thing on with the nose, the mustache, and the glasses. And I look at him, and I start laughing, and he takes them off, and they disappear. He says, Chris, it's good to see you laugh again. And he made me laugh, which took me out of that depressive state, the emotional state. And that's what he wanted, to take me out of that state. And I said, well, no, I'm not laughing at you. He says, I know you're not laughing at me. It was just, I wanted to break you out of that. And then so that you would listen to me. And then he shared with me, something that was very important. And he says, will you always remember this? And I said, yes. And then, he left. And then I had other experiences in my life with him as well. But I'm listening to your story, and I'm just tearing up because, when you've had that experience, and I know that some listeners don't believe in him, and some people aren't sure, and then some people do. Listen, he's real, and whether you want to criticize me or not, I don't care. He's real. I had the experience, and I've had other ones. And when I do ITC, EVP, and I do spirit communication, his name is mentioned many times by spirits that see him when they're crossing over. So the evidence is there, okay? It's up to you whether you want to believe it or not. But I'll tell you, there's many times I miss him. Because when you're with him, you said there's no judgment, you're fully accepted, and the love that comes from him makes you feel whole.
Yes. Absolutely so. The second experience that I had was much more detailed, much more comprehensive. And I spent several hours out of my body, and a large portion of that time was with Jesus. And that feeling, especially, I really think that, any of your listeners or anybody in the world in general that has a problem with Jesus, it's not a problem with him. It's a problem with the consciousness that follows the religion that professes his name. And and I get it, because frankly, so much of that culture, the Christian culture, it's almost opposite of what the actual experience of being with him is. It's very different. So I understand why people might feel some negativity in that area. Mm-hmm. But my experience coming especially out of a Christian background where Jesus is the most revered figure, to come into his presence was just, it just melted your soul. And in that, my second experience, the second one, I was not facilitated. That one, there was a spontaneous eruption of that same energy, and I recognized it from the first time. I'm like, oh, wow, this is fun. Except that it got much more intense, where, I couldn't feel anything in my body anymore. Just the whole body faded out. And then there was like this eruption that went off in my stomach, moved up into my heart. And when it hit my heart is where I stopped having fun. And I thought, oh, this is real. I'm going to die. Because I thought I was having a heart attack. I didn't know what else to call it, because I felt like my heart was going just a million miles an hour in all these different directions. And I thought, my physical heart can't take this anymore. And then there was a moment where I kind of looked at the fear of death, and I saw all the things I stood to lose. And I thought, oh well, just whatever. If this is my time, I let go. And there was a moment of surrender. And then all of a sudden I felt my heart explode, and I found myself out of my body in the most beautiful light that I'd ever experienced to that point in time. And it was, but it was a light that I felt more than saw. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
it does,
it's like the feeling is so intense that, and the way that my mind understood it is like, I'm seeing the feeling. I'm seeing the.
Yeah, you're becoming a part of it. You feel, you meld in, and you are a part of it.
Yes. And I just, the feelings I had were just uncontrollable tears and weeping. And just because the joy was so intense.
I see.
That I couldn't stand in it. It was almost too much. And I remembered thinking, if my body isn't dead, and if it were here, it would be, because it couldn't take this. It was like such a powerful energy. It made me feel like my whole body would have dissociated. It would have just come apart at the seams. And at the same time, it was like I was seeing everything in my life. So just flashing through my life again, this time without interviewers, without angelic beings talking to me.
So it was just you and this
light? Just me and this light.
I
did this for the first probably 15 minutes or so. And in that space, it was like I could see everything that had happened in my life, and it all made sense. There was understanding, and everything that I thought I beat myself up over, or thought, wow, I just wasn't good enough. There was just this release of seeing the perfection in it, and understanding how everything that others saw as my mistakes were the very things that I needed to experience in order to have this unfolding bliss in that space. Wow. And it just kept growing, and every question that I had would instantly, it felt like there were these feelers that would go out from my mind into the light and just research all this understanding and bring it back. And then every question I'd have on that, there'd be like peripheral topics, and those were all answered, and they were all answered at the same time. It was just this ongoing explosion of energy, love, joy. And there was this feeling of like, I am never going to have to suffer again. I was surprised. I got to come back to my body a little while later. But so
right. Oh, the aches and pains. I'm back in this vessel. Oh,
yeah. But after a number of minutes of that, where I started to expand into that light and to really feel into it, then there was a moment where I felt somebody just on the edge of consciousness come into my space. Like it's just a being of light. Mm-hmm. And I knew who it was the minute that he came into that space. And so this was Jesus again. And in this particular instance, it was much more intimate in the sense that where the first one with him involved more memory of past, like before this life. This was very direct interaction, communion, in a very personal way. where he just looked at me. And it may sound simple, but just looking in his eyes, the feeling of having my soul undone, of having it just unraveled. And so as he came into view, not just in visual view, but into awareness, the view of awareness, it felt like I had another explosion in my heart, which took me as much higher in joy, bliss, just understanding, as the first explosion had taken me from my body into the light, if that makes any sense at all.
Yes, it does.
And then he proceeded to take the next half hour, I don't know what time passed in Earth time, but a large amount of time to communicate with me, talking to me about my life up to that point in time. Like it wasn't him kind of pointing out and saying, hey, you could have done better here or there. It was more like, hey, you're still holding on to some hurt here. You're not seeing the way that God sees. You're not understanding. Let me help you see. And he would like take me into his way of seeing my life until like all of those patterns of pain started to come undone. The things that I thought that I had done poorly, where I maybe had hurt somebody, or and he just allowed me to see it from this totally different perspective of just love, acceptance. It was absolute beauty. And as we completed that life review with him, and again, it wasn't judgmental at all. It was just, how can I release you so you can feel this joy more fully? He was just all about expanding me into that loving state. And as we came to the end of that, he started talking to me about the earth moving forward and things happening on the earth. And he started to show me a lot of the things that I had said I desired in my first experience, to feel that love on earth. He started showing me the mechanism of the earth transitioning from the state that we find ourselves now into a state where those remaining on the earth feel that love that exists in the heavenly state, where we're conscious of it, or very much in the space that you were talking about, of like feeling the flower and like, I don't want to step on that. And yet at the same time, feeling that absolute unconditional love that allows the oneness in a way that it doesn't damage the flower, that it becomes beautiful to merge with it, to walk with it, to be part of it. And so, I don't know if I ought to stop here and give you a chance to ask more questions.
No, go ahead. Please go, Brent, please.
So he started showing me, he showed me the earth. I saw like in my mind's eye, and it wasn't even just like in my mind's eye, because you think of that and you imagine seeing like the earth or something, but it was almost like being one with the information, so that it's part of you. It's arising within you. And so he's still talking. And then there's this experiential understanding that's unfolding. And the experiential understanding is I'm seeing the earth, experiencing the earth, and I'm seeing all these lights over the face of the earth. And I'm understanding that these lights, they're not just Christians. They're from all these different religions and cultures and spiritual understandings. And there's this understanding that it needed to be that way. That the idea that just one faith is able to raise the earth is just not correct. That we need all of the different cultures and peoples lifting together, in a sense. But I saw these lights on the face of the earth, and I understood them to be individuals who were having experiences like I was. And some of them not as intense, some of them more intense, but they were having these experiences where they're questioning, they're finding that life is more than what they've been taught. Whether it's a dramatic experience like the one I was having or something else, there's still this penetration through the veil of understanding present in this world to see something a little bit more. And what I saw is that the world that we have, it operates on certain laws, but those laws aren't fixed. Those laws are actually connected to consciousness. It's like a group consciousness, as it were, that people all across the face of the earth are plugged into certain belief systems and understandings about what it means to be human, what it means to age, what it means to die, what it means to suffer, what it means to work hard. And there are all these different beliefs that were not just idle beliefs. They were actually impacting consciousness. They were by virtue of where they were being held in the center of our beings, they were actually creating the law that the earth is governed by. And so,
I understand.
as individuals would then come through this veil of beliefs into the heavenly state, they could not help but have some of those laws inside them dissolved because they've seen something else. They understand life differently.
I see. This reminds me of, the study I had with the gateway analysis that the CIA talked about Robert Monroe with out-of-body experiences, and the report that they did for Army Intelligence 1983, as well as a couple out-of-body experiences I had that kind of tied it all together, in that the Creator is experiencing things through us, all possibilities, so allows us with our free will, whether to believe or not believe, follow different paths so that the Creator can experience it through us. So when you're describing the earth with all these other different belief systems and different religions and stuff like that, the Creator has to experience all that through others. And that then goes back up to them. But what happens during that process is some of us get lost, we get hard on ourselves, and our soul has a hard time getting back. We get stuck here. And it's our own attachments, our own burdens that we create for ourselves, when Jesus, and as well as some others, may be saying, no, don't. We want to cleanse you of that, and like angels come down and say, awaken now, awaken out of this disturbed state so you can go back home. So
that's the misunderstanding of judgment right there, is that so often in conservative religious belief, it's God that's judging us, and it's no. We are caught in a web of judgment. We are caught in a web of our own judgment, our own limiting beliefs. And it is the divine being, Jesus, other enlightened individuals who have worked together to try to help us be free from that web of beliefs.
Correct.
And so this is what he was showing me. But me, I had no background in this. So this was just all overwhelming and just shocking and like, oh my goodness, because I'd never considered that it might work this way. I just never considered how it might work. But just being shown that the reason that the world is the way it is, the suffering, the pain, everything else, that it isn't God decreeing this on us. It's we are here, and through our own continued sleep, as it were, slumber relative to divine principles, we perpetuate the illusion. We keep it going. We keep the world operating the way it has been. And I saw that as these individuals, probably many of your listeners and other people who are interested in related things. I mean, these are the types of people who are coming through, experiencing, understanding. And as they understand, there's like a knot in their heart, a knot of consciousness, as it were, that starts to loosen, that starts to unravel. And as it unravels, it's not just their own knot. This was the thing that I saw that was so profound to me, is that there was like a shared web of consciousness. And so when you start to work through your own pains and hurts and shames and judgments, that all of those pertain to your family, to your culture, to your society. And so as these lights and all of these different cultures started to come through and started to work through that massive consciousness that was just bogging everything down, it affected not just themselves, but everybody in their family, affected everybody in their community. And I saw that as all of these different lights were coming through and having these experiences, that the structural integrity of consciousness as we know it started to crumble. Like the whole thing started to give way until there were just so many holes in this concept of what reality is that it could not maintain itself anymore. And then everybody left in the world at that time came through into this joy, the joy that I was feeling, and maybe even more, all at once in the body.
To heal it?
Yeah, they all came through in their body into that joy. It was like a raising of the whole earth.
Yep. It's interesting is, I wrote recently on my social media, and I was talking about this, was my concern, obviously what we've gone through the last few years, is the truth, the manipulation, the deceit from all levels, from media, politics, whatever else is going on, government, you name it. but also certain influencers on social media and stuff like that, that there's this deceit and manipulation where part truths are then mixed in with untruths to try to have some agenda. And it has caused, especially in America, the last year or so, caused us major disarray where it's affected the collective. And my concern is that each individual that's a part of the collective, if they're manipulated in such a way that they go off their path because of these untruths, they're not only affecting their life purpose, but they're affecting everybody else they were supposed to come in contact with. And then you have this collapse. And if it gets to such a point, there's such a huge collapse, it's going to affect our Earth. It's going to affect our planet because our frequency and vibration has to be in a certain parameter to keep this whole hologram world in existence for us to experience. But if we're all thrown off, going into ways where all our beliefs are different, what is the collective holding together anymore? And that's my concern, is that we're going to see more problems with the Earth, more problems going on, unless we start to come back to working on a similar agenda to bring things together and to create solutions instead of saying, well, this is the way and I'm not going to do it. And that's what, that separation is going to separate this reality. And that's my concern as we move forward, is how can we heal that and kind of bring that back together and creating more harmony?
Yeah.
Do you have any principles or anything that you learned from your experiences?
Yes.
You do?
I do.
Okay.
One of this experience went on for several hours, and so there's a lot more to it, and I'm guessing we aren't going to have time to get into all that in today's podcast or subsequent experiences. But to the question that you were just asking, one of the things that I saw and understood, and this goes back to even just a basic biblical passage about something Jesus said, where he said that we were the leavening of the world, and it only takes a little bit of leavening hidden in the meal in order for the bread to rise, right? And this idea that it only takes a few of us. And because what's really interesting about this concept in consciousness is that if you start thinking about the everybody going all these different directions and the media doing what it's doing, I mean, it's enough to make anybody start having their heart contract. You can feel it.
I went up and down through it last year. Trust me. I was getting upset. I go, why am I becoming a part of this tangled web? Exactly.
You almost have to unplug from it. Because it's too much. And for most of us to watch that, there's just so much negativity and such a low vibration in all of it that it takes you down. But if you get into this belief that others have to fix themselves in order for the world to transition in a beautiful way, you're going to be in a space where your heart starts to shut down. Because you're limiting your own creative capacity based on the choices of others. Instead of being able to come in and recognize that you are creating your own experience. Others are choosing whether to be part of your experience or not.
And they may influence it, but as you're saying, it's up to you.
It's up to you. We have these negative experiences, and the tendency is to go into blame and to start like pointing outside of ourselves and saying, okay, well, this person was just a jerk, and that's why I feel this way. Instead of realizing that in many instances, that person is just reflecting back a hurt inside of us that hasn't healed yet. And if we can get in and understand it, love it, heal it so that it releases, then the people who are reflecting back that negativity start to step out of our lives. And so the world is going to go through some reorganization, and some of that may be pleasant and some of it may be unpleasant, but our personal experience doesn't have to be based on what other people are choosing into. Like as a perfect example, this last year in the pandemic, so many people were freaking out and saying 2020, worst year ever. But for me, it was the best year ever. It really was. I had so much liberation, so much expansion, so much opportunity to meet people, to interact with people that were just loving and kind and amazing. And every now and then, I have to go out and get groceries, and I'm like, oh yeah, there's a pandemic going on. But the thing is that we don't have to mirror what the rest of the world is choosing to experience. And as we let go of that pain, as we let go of that hurt, it only takes a few of us to start impacting the consciousness of those around us.
Right.
And so it's kind of like getting back to the basics of, yes, I mean, to the extent that we can joyfully impact people around us, influence people around us, wonderful. Let's step out and do that. I mean, you have this podcast going, and that's a wonderful example of having that kind of an impact. But even just in the simplicity of doing our own inner work of awareness, of becoming aware of those thought patterns that keep us from experiencing the moment-to-moment the moment-to-moment experience of God's love. As we become aware of those, as we heal those, as we release those, so that we can experience more peace, more joy in our body, more acceptance of the state that we're in. So we're no longer fighting with it, but coming to peace with it, releasing the charge on it, releasing the turmoil. We're actually doing the work that is going to help unravel the veil for the whole world.
Oh, that's amazing.
So it allows.
You mean we all are? You are?
Everybody who is in this space of awareness is doing the work directly. Okay, yeah. Now, the rest of the world is still reflecting back those areas that maybe we need to do some more healing on. And so they're helping too, just not as consciously.
I understand.
So, but there was this recognition that we can choose to step into that space now. We don't have to wait on the whole world to rise. We can do our work now and start to experience that. And even while the rest of the world is choosing to have whatever reorganization experiences it's going to choose to have, we can be in a different space. We can
we create our own reality.
We do.
It's like, and then that reality attaches to others, kind of like the flower of life, and it all these molecules combine, and then it creates, and what happens is things that are outside that bubble begin to see this and may get attracted to it because they prefer this frequency than that frequency, and then it just grows.
Yeah.
And like an organism.
It does. And at some point, anybody that doesn't want to continue to learn or grow in that new frequency, they make the choice to get off. And so, but there is this transition, there's this change, and we get to be a part of it just in our personal inner work, and it does impact world events. It's been my experience that, because one of the more profound things I think I was shown later in the vision is Jesus ended up leading me into the presence of God, an individual that I know as my father. There is like this understanding of, this is my creator. This is the being who is responsible for it all. And he showed me a pattern of the heaven. He was showing me how the heavens work and how they expand in infinite joy. Because I mean, one of my questions is like, how do you be in a heavenly state and never get tired of it? And he was answering this question for me. He was showing me the light that was in everything and helping me understand that the light was as much God as he is. Like, so I'm talking to a person, or what appears to be a person, and yet there's this light, and I'm understanding that he is the light and he is the person. He's both. And, but it wasn't just like he is the light. It was, I am the light.
Yep.
And so there was this,
the absolute,
there was a,
you come from the source and you go back to the source, but you have your own individual personality while you're back in the source, which you didn't have before. Yeah, I understand that.
And so he was showing me that by virtue of this light being in everything, including us, that when we put stuff in our heart, and this goes back to your quantum science question, when you put stuff in your heart, it goes into the light, and then it returns to us what we send out. And he was showing me this in real time. And so as he was talking, his words, I could feel them going into my heart, and they were repatterning what I was believing about myself and about life. And then they would go out in the light, and then they would bring back another explosion of joy, like as if I had never felt love before, and bringing me to my knees in tears and thinking, this is amazing. And he was showing me, he's like, you don't have to know how it works. You just have to know that it does, and just put it in your heart that there's more. And so he was showing me that the key to heaven was this ongoing belief that whatever joy we have today is just a drop in the bucket compared to what's coming tomorrow, that it just continues to grow. It continues to evolve. And that And it took me a while. It wasn't like during this experience that it really clicked in, but it was over the next year or two that it really started to hit home of, wait a minute, this isn't just the pattern for heaven, it's the pattern for earth too. And so I started having all these experiences where I would feel beings from the other side leading me to put things in my heart. And as I put them in my heart, they'd show up in the world around me. And then I began to realize that I'd spent my whole life working with my hands to make things happen. And yet my hands were nowhere near as effective as just doing the healing in my heart and seeing the world reflect back to me those changes. And so with this whole effort to see the world rise, sometimes it feels heavy. And if it feels heavy, we're not quite in the right energy yet, because the world rises as we release the heaviness and as we step into the joy of our inner being.
This infinite intelligence that's connected to the ether, that connects to us and the realities of our walls and everything else, that if we remove the physical bodies, such as the hands, the speech, the hearing, the smell, those senses that we're so used to interacting in this realm, and we concentrate on the heart, our soul, and our spirit, that's the gateway, the key to heaven. And I remember St. James Hotel, investigating with Bill Chappell, and a spirit had come through me who was a cowboy that died from being shot, and his spirit was still kind of trapped there at this place. And all of a sudden, this beautiful woman shows up, this spirit named Sarah, and he turns to Sarah, like, what are you doing here? He's like, Sam, I came back for you. Mm-hmm. She's like, well, where were you? He's like, I'm in heaven. He's like, well, how come I'm not in heaven? He's like, Sam, it's what's inside you. Inside you was revenge. You held on to that revenge, and because this guy killed you, and this argument that turned into your death. But you have to let go of that. He goes, well, how do I let go? He goes, all of a sudden, he starts feeling love for her that he missed, and it starts elevating him. He starts to feel that what's filling his heart now is the memory of love, and he elevated. And she goes, see, now you're at love. You've let go of that. This is how you get to heaven. And then all of a sudden, he left with her. And I witnessed this, and I'm experiencing this going, wow, now I get it. Heaven is so much closer than we think. It's not like this great distance and this, people see a tunnel, they get on a bus, they get on a train or a doorway and they open up. It's all different for everybody. But the fact of the matter is, it is a change of consciousness. Yes. And the consciousness can start by what's in your heart to guide you there, because the emotions is the physical reality, the interaction that we've created. And if we let go of some of those emotions and concentrate on the higher frequency emotions, that will gain access to that higher consciousness.
Absolutely that. Yes.
So that's fascinating. We have a few minutes here. Now, you had stated there's many heavens, there's many planes of existence that exist in these other realms?
Yes. So in subsequent experiences, it's just like every time I thought, wow, I've hit a roof or a ceiling, then I'd have the next experience. And because I think the first experience or two, it almost reinforced some of my, as much as it contradicted my religious thoughts, it almost reinforced it. I'm like, okay, yeah, what I'm doing is right, and this is the right way. And then I started having more experiences and thinking, okay, I have no idea what's going on. There's just so much more out there. And it's okay to acknowledge that we're human and we're not seeing everything, and that the experience, this is the confusing part, the experience of coming through the other side and seeing everything is not everything. Right. It's like, right. It's the feeling of it. And I'm sure we're connected to all things, but it wasn't all in our awareness at the same time. And so that there's more that can be learned. And I think that was even something that I felt God was showing me, is that his experience of ongoing expansion and joy is that there's more. You don't get to the end of it.
Right.
And that's actually a beautiful thing, is to be in a state of humility where you can say there is more. But one of the experiences I had was starting to remember other lifetimes where I had experienced God in other traditions and cultures. And this was really bizarre for me, because I didn't know anything about these other religions or cultures, and yet I'm finding myself experiencing God through their eyes and realizing not only were their heavens very real, but they were very different from my own. It was like different colors of light almost, and it wasn't a right or wrong thing so much as a preference thing. Do you like oranges? Do you like apples? Do you like bananas? What's your favorite fruit? And what's your favorite flavor of ice cream? What's your favorite flavor of heaven? That each one of these were a different way of experiencing God. And in each way of experiencing God, there were different understandings to be had. And one of the things that I saw was that to the degree that we could set aside our prejudices for each other and stop minimizing each other's very real beliefs, to acknowledge maybe not everybody else's path is going to conform with mine. And not only that, but maybe their experience is unique from mine. And so instead of telling them what I think they need to know, maybe I should listen more and just come to a deeper understanding. But so I saw that these different paths each held perspectives that were necessary to raising the whole. They were like different tools, almost like each one had been given a different part of the car. Like one was given the steering wheel, and another one's given the gas pedal, and another one's given the GPS system. And it was only by integrating them all that you could really put the vehicle together to its maximum efficiency. That there needs to be this healing where each culture brings its traditions, lets go of all the fear, shame, and other stuff that's present in them, and then brings those the understandings together in an integrated way that allows us to lift as a whole.
That's a really good point. Like all perspectives merge. When you reflect back and you look at the studies in near-death experiences, how there's a lot of similarities, but then also differences. I mean, real quickly, you look at Daniel Brinkley's experience where he realized he could have been a better person and he had died 3 times. He didn't see he saw these light beings. He didn't see angels and Jesus or God, but he saw these light buildings and these beautiful places. And then you have Eben Alexander, who had his experience, his unique experience. And there weren't really strong religious tones to their experiences. But then you have someone like Betty Eady, who saw Jesus, and she comes back. It just goes to show you that this perspective of all possibilities is connected all to the Creator, to see things from all different angles and allow it to be as such. Because if it was just this short, narrow path and just this one way, and that's the only way it was, how would the Creator truly get to know itself?
Yeah.
And experience itself? And how would we get to have all these experiences to take with us?
You referenced the short and narrow way, or the narrow path.
Yeah.
And I do feel that there is one, but it isn't the doctrines of the different cultures, and it isn't the approach. It's more this process of releasing what we think we know in order to receive something better. Because if we're going to move from where the world is today to the space where divine love exists in this world, then we have to let go of what we think we know. Because it's what we think we know that's anchoring us. We have to develop entirely new ways of seeing ourselves, of seeing God, of seeing each other.
And seeing each other. Absolutely. And it's just, I realized that I learned a lot in the last couple of years because of my political differences and others. Even though I'm coming from a higher level to see things from a certain perspective, I must remember not everybody is. Yeah. And it's their journey or things that they're holding that is coming out. Their issues and stuff that is coming out in that particular belief that, they need to purge that, or they need to go through that, or they need to have that particular experience because it is what their soul has chosen and why they're here. And I'm like, wow, I need to step back and look things from all different angles and just saying, well, hey, here's what's going on. But yes, that's what's going on. But there's so much more going on with them that you're forgetting about. And that's where the spiritual and the emotional intelligence comes in, to see those different dimensional perspectives and awareness, and to give those people their space to grow, to develop, and make their own choices. We can influence people, but we should not, take them away from their path and their own journey.
And we don't need to for the earth to rise. In fact, we almost have to let them have that experience, because that's part of healing our hearts, is to be in a space of peace, even when other people are choosing different paths or in a different space of learning.
Exactly. Now, have you found that there's been difficulty expressing some of these near-death experiences in this belief system of an afterlife with your peers at all?
It depends on which peers you're referring to.
Yes, I understand.
If you're talking about in the science realm, I don't have these conversations with very many people.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I played football. I was an artist, and I went to a Catholic school. So when I talked about ghosts, spirits, the afterlife, there tended to be some confrontations here and there, and I understand that. So, but I want to thank you. I wish we had more time to talk, but you've been a wonderful guest. And what is it that you have next in the science field that you're working on or you plan on doing? Anything particular you can share?
I am not permitted to share.
Okay, that's what I thought.
It's one of those public company things where they get very particular about what's said, when, and how. So
Totally understand. Well, Brent, you've got your book out that people can get. It's called Bringing Heaven Home. You can get it at Amazon.com. I'll have the link up on the Spirit Talk site for Planet Paranormal. But then also you got the website innerworldmovement.com. Can you share with us briefly what that is?
Yes, you were asking if I have difficulty sharing with my peers. And what I've decided is that if I find my own peers, people where we can have conversations like you and I've been having, that it makes things so much better. Because now we have a forum where we can share and listen in a safe, hopefully judgment-free space. And I find a lot of joy in that. So it's a group of people who are trying to advance the dialogue that we're having right now on the transition of the earth.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, thank you very much for being on Spirit Talk, Brent. I really appreciate it.
And thank you. I've really enjoyed you as a host. So,
no, you're welcome. All the best to you. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and everybody across the planet, this is Chris Fleming, and you've been listening to this edition of Spirit Talk with Dr. Brent C. Satterfield. See you next month. If I may, Brent, I want to share a couple other experiences with you just to let you know that I do understand. And it's nice to share that with someone that has had similar supernatural, spiritual experiences. I've had experiences with angels, with Jesus, and other stuff. A lot of it I have spoken about publicly, and some stuff I haven't. The one interesting one, the shocking one, was I tend to say to angels or guys or even God himself, I say, you know what, I want to know about this. Can I have this experience? And sometimes it happens, and it's pretty bizarre. But I had one that I'll just share with you briefly, because you were talking about the version of God that you saw, and I was attuned to that. Is I remember I see this giant, it's kind of like you would see in the Greek with the big Parthenon type thing, this what you were describing it as a temple. Yeah, it was like a temple. But this thing was massive, and it was all white. And when I look at the floor, it was like glass and white. My friend told me that, gold, when you remove the impurities, is like glass. It's just completely pure, and I didn't know that. So I'm seeing this, and I'm seeing all these humongous statues of angels. right? And there were 7 of them. And I'm seeing like 4 on one side, 3 on another side. And I'm walking and I'm just looking. The toe of this angel is so big. I'm like, God, it's bigger than my head. It's bigger than my body. I'm like, just insane. And I look up at it and I keep walking. And I see something starts to be coming into focus as I'm walking down. I'm being guided towards this. Then all of a sudden I feel like I'm being looked at, like viewed. And I know that feeling. And I turn and look and I look up and I see they're actual angels. And I'm like, holy cow. Because I remember I had asked earlier that week, I said, God, I want to see, the angels. I want to see where they are,
Mm-hmm.
And as I'm walking down this, I realize, oh my God, these are all the archangels, the warrior angels. And then all of a sudden, I see this gigantic chair, huge. And as I look at this chair, I look closer, I see the universe spinning around. I see lightning bolts coming out, planets, everything. But I see this other form of energy around it. And there's all these other things behind it that I couldn't see because I wasn't paying attention. I was just, this entire energy field that was there in this chair, and it was shooting lightning bolts out, everything. I realized that this was the creator, but it wasn't an old man sitting in a chair. It wasn't, some spirit or angel. It was just this massive energetic field that was a collective of everything in the multiverse and the universe. And it was displaying itself to me that it is all things. And as I realized that I'm standing in front of the creator, it beckons me to come forward, and I start to walk forward, and then I don't remember anything else.
Mm-hmm.
I just remember waking up going, holy cow. Told a friend of mine, he says, you need to go look at Revelations, whatever, John. And I go look at it and I read it. I go, that's it. That's where it is. It's just a slightly different description, but there was 7 angels there. And there was and I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. And why? I don't know exactly why I saw that. Maybe it was to say, hey, I'm not this old man sitting in a chair. I am this energetic presence that has created man as well as other things. So just realize this is the source. You wanted to know the source. This is the source. So, what do you do with that? You just sit back and go, wow, I don't know.
It's pretty amazing. I'm just thrilled that, it's interesting now to go back and read other people's near-death experiences and listen to their stories. You can always see the YouTube videos, especially from like a lot of the evangelical mindsets of, let's tell you what's actually in heaven. And because this person saw this angel that was 8 feet tall. But then you hear these other accounts like yours, you got the angel that's, a couple hundred.
Oh, these are like 15, 20, 30 feet tall. Yeah. I mean, they were just stories,
And so I hear all these things now and I think, because I recognize that they speak to us differently in that heavenly space. There's so many symbols, and yet I can't say that just because there's symbolism in it that it isn't real also. And so, because in your account of going before the throne, the thing that jumps out at me is a lot of traditional religious thought, in a sense, of these massive angels that are their size, their stature, conveying their authority and position before God. And you're coming up to the throne, and then you get, everything there is just preparing you for this one experience to realize it's not an old man. Right. There's this other thing that's there. And so I find the experiences really fascinating because of the way that they teach, and every aspect in them is just designed for that teaching. So it's made me a lot more humble, where I step back and say, well, I may have seen these things, I may have experienced these things, but it doesn't mean that's exactly how it is. And
same here.
Especially as I've seen from the perspective of some of the other cultures and realized that it isn't just, because we may all use the same word, God or divine or whatever it is that we use, but the meaning that we ascribe to that and like what it means about our devotion and how to approach it and how we feel it, it just produces such different emotions, such different experiences. And I was in India in a Hindu ashram and had the Hindu heavens open up at one point and was sitting there just my jaw open thinking, okay, I was feeling a little unfaithful because I was questioning and it's like, I'm sorry, Jesus, but I like this one. And it's just, and I'm starting to question whether I chose the right heaven. And, but just this understanding that there are these different perspectives. And but I have not been able to let go of the way I feel in Jesus's presence, because that's unique to me. And I haven't been able to let go of the way that I feel in that Hindu expanse when you like just merge with everything, and it's blissful and amazing. And there's several different types of these experiences that I look at them and I think I can't have heaven without it. And the beautiful thing about the experience I had in India was, as I was kind of looking and feeling the experience of the Hindu heaven, there was, and I'm having these thoughts of, did I pick the wrong one? I heard a voice that said, I am the light that is in all things and through all things. And that means the light that is in all religions and through all heavens. And there was this understanding that like there were, maybe, I don't know if it's an infinite number or a near infinite number of different ways of experiencing God. And that every single one of those
all
is
possibilities
beautiful.
are possible through me.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you could expand on that for an infinite direction, but that the concept of a highest heaven, if there is such a thing, is the one that includes the light from all of them, where you're not having to choose and say, I am this and exclusively this to the exclusion of everything else, but it's the space where all light, all love is accepted.
And I guess that's something we all shoot to go back to, you know? I remember during my one experience where I called out and I said, what is consciousness? He says, I am consciousness. And I said, what do you mean? Who are you? He says, I am the Alpha, I am the Omega, I am the beginning, I am the end, and you are everything in between. And I said, okay. He says, I am you and you are me, and together we are. And I was like, oh my God, I'm talking to God. But it's not God, it's the creator, because there's different gods, or your interpretation of God.
Yeah.
So I try not to use the word God anymore, because then you say, who's God? You know, Indian, whatever country you're from. But this was the source. This was the creator. So for me, it was very prophetic. I want to ask you this because I was doing some audio analysis from an investigation I did a couple weeks ago. And a word came up I was not familiar with, but it was so profound that I went and looked it online. And before I was going to communicate with these spirits and help them cross over, a male voice very strongly says, Ghana. And I'm like, Ghana? What is Ghana? Is that a word? So I looked it up and I saw it had to do with Hindu and Indian and belief, which was certain motivation, certain path that one soul would have. I mean, does that word mean anything to you, Ghana?
It's not one I've run into before.
Yeah, okay. I was just curious. I had to throw that out there because it's so fresh. I mean, it just came up and I'm like, all right, I'm still trying to figure out what this word means that Spirit was telling me, because it's obviously going to be an expansion of my consciousness and understanding it. So there's something to it.